Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Ben Rosie. I'm a consultant at Mutual Ventures, and this is the latest in the DFJ Trailblazer webinar series. For those of you who have been before, welcome back. And for those of you joining for the first time, where have you all been? So this is webinar 6. It's the penultimate in the series. So this may just be my bias here, but I think it will be one of the best, certainly in the top 7 anyway. In this series of webinars, we've been taking a deep dive into some of the most pressing issues in family justice, sharing learning from across the Trailblazers program and the wider children's services sector. And through this, kind of exploring what this means for professional practice, system working, and the future of family justice. Today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on trauma-informed practice and kind of how we can spread this throughout the system, why it's important, and we'll be exploring families' experiences of court and the challenges that they face. So I'm joined by a fantastic panel to take on this very complex topic today, including Kate Tilley from Pause, a charity that support women who have or are at risk of having a child removed from their care. I'm also joined by Grace Toller and Nikki Webster from the Centre for Justice Innovation, an organisation working on justice sector reform, who are seeking to ensure that the family justice system works in the best interests of children and families. So thank you all for joining me today. Uh, for those in the audience, we'll be running a Q&A. So once we've heard from our panelists, and if as they're speaking you find anything that you'd like to know more about, please pop a question in the box. It should be somewhere along the bottom panel. So that's probably enough from me. I think it's time to hand over to the people that we're all kind of actually here to hear from.
I'm first, aren't I, Ben? Shall I go? Hello, I'm Kate Tilley. I am the Director of Partnerships and Engagement at Pause. I'm just checking, can you hear me? Grace and Nikki, yes, you can. Okay, great. I'm going to talk to you this morning about a piece of work that we did with a small group of women as part of the Trailblazers project. And the aim of this really was to talk to women about what their experiences of court were and how there could be changes put in place across the system to help not necessarily change the outcome of what they experienced through court, but actually make the process less traumatizing. Before I start talking to you about what they shared with me, I really wanted to just start with some words from one of the graduates from Pause about some of their feelings about no longer being a parent who lives with their child. Ben, next slide, please.
It's almost seen as normal if you're a man who doesn't live with his kids. But if a woman doesn't have kids, she's clearly a bad mother who deserves it. That unspoken stigma. It's debilitating.
Thank you, Ben. Next slide. As I talk through some of the things that women shared with us, what I really want you to keep hold of is Helena's words about that unspoken stigma and how debilitating it is. Because I think what I'm going to talk to you about is the women's experiences, but all of them have that, I think, that shame and that stigma that runs through everything that they experience as they walk through into the court. So there were lots of things the women told us, but 5 key themes that I wanted to talk to you about today. The first one really was that they felt they would be better able to take part and take an active role in care proceedings and understand what was going on if they had better information and preparation beforehand. So lots of the women talked to us about not really understanding the process, having gone through the process, not always being really clear about what had happened and why it had happened. And that actually going into court for the first time is a really scary and a really frightening experience, particularly if you've never been into court. You know, there are lots of custom and practice and stuff that everyone else in the court building knows what's going on, they know what to expect. But actually for women going in for the first time, that's really, really terrifying. They felt it would have been really useful for them to have had some more information about what to expect, even down to simple things like what a courtroom might look like, who might be in the courtroom, and also some of the do's and don'ts, when they can speak, when they can't speak. Because actually some of the anxiety wasn't just about the outcome, but it was actually going through that process. And that was particularly difficult for women who hadn't had experience of ever going into a court before, but also for those women who had been in court proceedings in other areas of their life. For example, if they were subject to domestic abuse and had been through the criminal court around that. So there were lots of feelings around not knowing what to expect and feeling really uncertain. They all talked about feeling incredibly isolated and alone, and going back again to that feeling of shame and stigma, and that actually not being able to have anyone with them to emotionally support them as the process was going on felt really isolating. They had different relationships with their solicitors. Some found lots of support from there, but for others, it was someone they'd never met before. And they're in this really formal setting where there is a very formal process that's making decisions about some of the most intimate parts of their life. And they felt that that was something, just that sense of feeling isolated and alone. They felt that quite often all of the other professionals knew each other, and actually they would talk about people and professionals that they'd worked with for a long period of time, partly because of the adversarial nature of care proceedings, not feeling able to say hello or not knowing whether or not they could talk to people when they went in. So as well as worrying about, again, the outcome, this sense of feeling utterly alone when they were in there and absolutely terrified. They talked a lot about not feeling as if they were part of the process, as if it was a process being held by professionals over there and something that they watched. And that was made even harder by the language and the professional use of language that they didn't always understand. And that made it really hard. Some of them had good examples of solicitors who almost translated for them, but actually for lots of them, they said they really weren't too sure what was happening, what was being said, and that made it much, much, much harder to engage. They talked about how difficult it was hearing people describe them in ways that they didn't recognise, and how often they felt that some of the progress that they had made wasn't what the court had focused on. It was really difficult then for them to hear all of that. They talked about how consistency and having the same judge could make a massive difference. So a number of them had different judges through their care proceedings, and that they felt really difficult. And one woman talked really powerfully about how she had been invited to speak by the judge and how that didn't make a difference to the outcome of her case. But actually for her, it meant that she felt that she'd been heard and that she'd been listened to. And that made a really big difference to her experience of the whole process. And the final thing I think that they wanted to talk about was the fact that when care proceedings are over, they're left with all of the difficulties that led to care proceedings starting, but also that additional trauma and shame and stigma of going through care proceedings, and that really left them even more isolated, even more alone, and really not sure where to go for help or for support. And that immediately after court, they were not in a position to really understand all that had been decided or all that had been, talked about, or what that meant for them and their family going forward. So they were really, really clear about that. And I guess one of the things that really stuck with me was one of the women talked about the fact that actually she recognised that it was a difficult process, but what she said was she was left feeling broken, not by the outcome, but by the process itself. And actually what she wanted was a system that absolutely has to make decisions about children. I've got to be at the heart of it. But she said, did I have to get completely broken in the process as well? And I think that's something that I will finish on. Thank you, Ben.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kate. Really, really important to hear those experiences and kind of understand properly the people that are coming through the system. Grace and Nikki, if I hand over to you next, this slides.
Great, thanks, Ben. Hi everyone, I'm Grace. I'm the Family Justice Practice Specialist at the Centre for Justice Innovation. I'm going to start from me and Nikki. As this is a brief session. This is going to be a kind of high-level overview of trauma-informed practice, what it means, what it looks like. There's a lot more than we could get into than what we have time for today. But I'll start by looking at what trauma-informed actually means. It is a term that we hear a lot nowadays, and I think sometimes can be misunderstood or is a bit of a buzzword. But the thing to remember really about having trauma-informed practice is that it's not just things that you do, it is a whole way of being. So what you don't do is say, now I'm going to open my trauma-informed toolbox and start doing my trauma-informed piece of work. It is more about a shift in approach to every part of your work and a whole way of being, like I said. It is about recognizing what a parent is bringing with them, how that will impact them in a particular meeting or a session you're in the proceedings as a whole, and also when they go home afterwards. And then the next step for us as professionals is to adjust the process and adjust our practices accordingly. And that means acknowledging the trauma that a parent is bringing with them and adapting the environment and practice to adapt to parents' experience. Can I go on to the next slide, please, Ben? Thank you. This is one example of what to keep in mind when we're thinking about trauma-informed practice. It's a concept that I think a lot of us might be familiar with. It's called the window of tolerance. And that's a term used to describe the zone of arousal in which someone can function most effectively. And we all have this. So when a parent is in this zone, the window of tolerance, they are able to readily receive and process information and generally respond to the demands of everyday life without too much difficulty. But when they're not in that window of tolerance, they can go into hyperarousal, which can look like anger, being overreactive, aggressive, showing distress, or they can go into hypoarousal, where they might seem to have low energy, lethargic, they might seem disengaged, and that's when you might hear parents being called non-committed to the process. A person who has experienced complex trauma, like a lot of the parents we're talking about will have done, will likely have a narrower window of tolerance, and so will slip into those zones more easily. Where we're practicing in a trauma-informed way, what we want is for all professionals to be aware of this and to try and minimize triggers that can cause parents to slip out of their window of tolerance. And also, it's important to be aware of it so that we can truly understand what's actually happening for a parent when they're exhibiting those behaviors. The other thing to bear in mind is that, like I said, everyone has a window of tolerance, including us as professionals. So as professionals, we need to be aware of when we are moving out of ours. And part of being trauma-informed and having that as part of your practice is being aware of what we are bringing to the table when we're engaging with parents as well. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. On this slide, I've just put a few examples of what trauma-informed thinking in court can actually look like. This isn't an exhaustive list. These are just examples. I won't go through all of them because we don't have time, but I'll just pick out a few key ones. The first is relationship building, so meeting with parents and getting to know them as much as we can. Parents' experiences will likely have taught them not to trust professionals. They wouldn't have had positive experiences before. So doing that key relationship building work is what will allow those interventions in the court process to be successful and for parents to be successful in it. This relationship between professionals and parents can be a really tricky one because part of being trauma-informed is being aware of how parents will perceive us as professionals. We have to consider a parent's past experiences and also the power that we are bringing to the room as the one who's carrying out the assessment, who's writing the report or making the decision. And a parent knows that and reflecting on what is really a power imbalance there. The next one I'll touch on is openness and transparency. This is really important. Parents in care proceedings tell us all the time that they are at court and they have no idea what is going on, what the next steps are. And I think often that's because a lot of people think it's someone else's job to inform them, but we really mustn't be afraid to take it upon ourselves to make sure that parents truly understand what is happening in that moment, what is going to happen next, and what the outcomes might be. It's all about avoiding surprises and being really transparent. I'll also mention careful management of people. So if a parent is showing up to court or really any meeting with professionals, who is going to be in the room and why? It's important to avoid unnecessary people when a parent is being really vulnerable, and also make sure parents know who to expect and they know what everyone's role is. I'll also mention special measures quickly because this is a really important one because it's about being intentional. I think we can all think of examples of special measures, but to be really trauma informed in our approach, we need to make sure that they are meaningful and effective. If mum and dad, for example, are going to be kept separate, then they shouldn't be in the same waiting rooms together. They shouldn't be entering the building together. We have to be able to think creatively about what a parent really needs to address their difficulties. And also, it's about remembering that a parent's experience in court doesn't just start when they're in the room with you. It starts when they're in the car park, when they're walking through the front door, and trying to deal with that whole process in a trauma-informed way. The last one I'll touch on before I hand over to Nikki is on language. Kate referenced this as well. This is important too. I mean, they're all very important, as I said. This goes for how we speak to parents directly, how we speak in court in front of them, and all our written communications. Because what we have to remember is the primary audience for all of that is a parent and potentially their children as well. And the thing that is crucial is that they understand it and that it correctly reflects what their wishes are. So that means avoiding technical or legal jargon, and also things that can be taken as criticism to people who are extremely vulnerable and will be hypersensitive during this stage and this process. I think on that, I'll hand over to Nikki to talk to us about the experience of having received that kind of trauma-informed practice.
Thank you very much. I'm Nikki. So I'm an associate at the Centre for Justice Innovation, but I'm also a parent who's been through 2 different types of court proceedings, care proceedings for my children. I have quite a lot of experience, and kind of the first thing I wanted to touch on whilst we're talking about the trauma-informed court was about when you said, Grace, about the parents' appearance in court starts in the car park. It doesn't. It starts a couple of days before that, when you get that call from a solicitor. You've had no contact from anybody for months, and you get an email, probably, maybe a call, probably an email to say, don't forget court on Monday. I'll meet you outside at 10 o'clock. We'll talk then. So that's what you're going into court with. That's the communication you're going into court with. So you're in that courtroom from 2 days before. And also, from kind of what Kate said about the courtroom experience, yes, most of us have experience of courtrooms, whether that's in other family proceedings or criminal court. If we're talking of a kind of addiction lines, we're looking at probably criminal court. And for us, court is very judgmental. It's places where we're punished. It's places where we're judged. It's places where we're picked apart, blamed, accused, and then sent away with whatever punishment somebody that we've only just met deems is suitable for us, and that's it. So that's what that means. That's what that means to us, and it's it's very difficult. And going all the things that Kate said, echo all of that about what it's like to be in a non-trauma informed setting. I think it's very important to remember with that window of tolerance that Grace mentioned. And it's right, we have a very slim window of tolerance, but I feel like, certainly for myself and a lot of parents that I work with today, we don't sit in that window of tolerance. We sit in one of the other zones. That's our default. We're in fight or flight all the time, particularly in early court proceedings. Our lifestyles have brought us to the point where we're in court. We're deemed not safe to look after our children. So if you can just let that sink in for a second, that's what our lives have got to, that point where we're not deemed safe to be around our own children. So our lives are quite dark by this point. There's something deeper going on. And then we come into the court setting, fighting for our children with still those issues going on, because those issues are still there. They haven't gone anywhere. They're still there. So we're still fighting those. We're still living them. But now we're fighting for our children as well. And now we're being judged and we're being punished and we're sitting in that guilt and shame. So we are in fight or flight constantly. So when we disengage, when we don't make eye contact, when we stumble over our words or get very animated, and that's us surviving. That's our defense. That's our shield, and that's our armor. And then to be often felt like we're being criticized for wearing that armor. It's very, very hard to wear, because at that point, when that happens, the armor's only going to strengthen. It's not going to get any less. So we're not going to engage now because we don't feel safe to do so. So that's just what I wanted to mention kind of about that. And it's the reasons we're in court. So when going through non-trauma informed, it was never looked at why my life had gone wrong, why I couldn't parent successfully. It was always about how I didn't parent successfully and how my life looked. It wasn't never looked at why, what's going on underneath, what's brought us to this point. That was never questioned. It was always just how my reactions were wrong, and the level of wrongness in my reactions. When I'm going into a trauma informed court from the very, very beginning, I don't even recall how my life was going wrong. My actions were really brought into it, because from the very get-go, it was what was discussed, and what was of importance was why. So what's going wrong? Why have we got to this point? What do we change to make sure we can come out of this point successfully, or at the very least, let's not make sure we're here again in a few years' time. Because like I said, I went through 2 court proceedings. I lost custody of my boys. I have them back now, but when I didn't, not until I went through a trauma informed court for my little girl. So I came back to court. So many of us come back to court because nothing changes for us. There's no work done on what's going wrong until you get into a trauma informed practice. And it was really just simple things, like the communication. Talk to me. This is my life. This is my family. Please talk to me. Include me in that conversation. And these very, very simple things, like get my children's names right, get their ages right, get their sex right. You would be shocked to know the amount of times that professionals in a family court setting get your children's names wrong, get their ages wrong, even their sex. My final hearing for my boys, their surname's wrong. It's wrong. So legally, is it even my children? Because it's not their surname. How does that happen? That shouldn't happen like that. In my trauma-informed practice, my boys weren't part of the proceedings, yet my judge, to this day, this was 6 years ago, our hearing, to this day, he knows my son's names. They weren't even part of proceedings, but he knows their names. And then when I see him, he will ask me, how are they doing? And he recalls them, he knows them. That level of, I care. I'm interested. I'm invested. That's what it is. And it's that terminology about the all the different legal jargon. We don't understand that. So to bring it down, and actually for the judge to come down in the positive court hearing that I had. Are we allowed to say that it's for FDAC? Because I'm really struggling to not say that, and I'm trying not to judge one or the other, but I'm really struggling not to say. So I went through FDAC proceedings the second time, and for that judge to come down, my judge to come down and sit opposite the table with me. So he wasn't 2 levels above me, and I wasn't having to look up at him. Past a clerk, past solicitors, he came down and sat opposite me at a table and talked to me. Little things like that are so very important. If I'm starting to get emotional, it's not just overlooked or ignored. It's, what do you need? Are you okay? Do you want to take a break? Do you need do you need a drink? Do you need a tissue? Do you want to talk about it? Or do you not want to talk about it? I was involved from the very, very beginning. I was involved, and having somebody in the courtroom in a non-trauma informed, you're so lonely. You're in there completely by yourself, with everybody discussing what's going on for you, with very little involvement in that. You are literally being spoken about, certainly not to. But to have a whole team of people in a trauma informed practice that actually you've met on a regular basis, you meet on a regular basis. We see them regularly. There's regular phone calls, there's regular communication. They've told me what's going to happen in this courtroom. They've told me what they're going to discuss. They've told me the bad points that they're going to raise, but they also focus on the good points. What's going well? What did I do right this month? What am I done well? How have I raised my children well? What am I doing right? What's going good for us? And what can I do right in the future? I might not be doing it now, but I absolutely have the capacity to do it. If someone can just give me a chance and maybe guide me a little bit, hold my hand. I'm going to finish on this because I'm very aware that I can go on for a very long time on this stuff if I'm allowed. I was talking to Grace about it this morning, and it's very and it kind of reminded me that very often from our backgrounds where we've come to, we're not productive members of society, us parents that end up in family court. We're not productive parents. We're certainly not productive members of society. We come from very often very trauma backgrounds, very unhealthy backgrounds. And what happens is, I think it's very difficult for very functioning professionals to understand that actually we need our hands held. Very, very simple tasks, particularly in a court setting and a high stress, re-traumatizing, because that's what happens in court. We get re-traumatized. All of our old mistakes, all of our old traumas thrown back at us, usually in a report, which doesn't translate very well. We need someone to hold our hands. We don't know how to handle that situation. We don't know how to do them very basic things. We do need someone to guide us through that. And in a trauma-informed setting, that's exactly what you get, is someone to hold your hand and just remind you to breathe. It's really simple things. Remind you to breathe, remind you to take a breath, remind you to have a drink, get some fresh air, little things like that. So I think it's very important to remember. And actually some compassion, some humility, and actually professionals don't have all the answers. Often parents do, but we just need a little bit of help finding them. And that's what trauma-informed court does. It helps us to find the answers to become better parents so that our children can become better people in the long run. Yeah, I'm going to stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nikki, and thank you to Grace and Kate as well. I think a lot of kind of what's been said here it's common sense, isn't it? And I think Nikki, you kind of ended there really nicely with it. It's about compassion and really caring about people rather than focusing on the process, I guess. I'm going to stop sharing the slides. Okay, hopefully that's stopped, and I'll cut that bit out of the final recording where I'm staring slightly gormlessly at the screen. Well, that was really interesting. It certainly raised quite a few questions for me, and I'm sure people in the audience as well. If I can kind of, Kate, begin with you, and Grace and Nikki, please do feel free to jump in as well. You mentioned a lot of the kind of challenges that families, particularly women, face when entering court, and I know from conversations we've had before that it can often be someone's first time in court. So what are some of the kind of, I guess, most obvious fears that the system itself creates, and more importantly, what can kind of be done to avoid these? Okay, you're on mute.
Of course. I'm back. I think going back to what Nikki said, I think what the women talk to us about and what they tell us all of the time is that not knowing what to expect. And actually, if you think about any new situation or any situation you're worried about, it is less anxiety inducing if you know what to expect. I think having someone talk through, what is likely to happen, what will be talked about you. Nikki talked about that as well, about actually hearing, the worst bits of you described without any opportunity to address that or to be part of that. But knowing what's happening, knowing what's going to take place, knowing who's going to be in the room and what their jobs are and what their functions are. What women also talked about was knowing what some of the do's and don'ts are. Everyone else knows, they've been in that professional setting before. And courts can be really intimidating. They're intimidating for professionals who spend a lot of time in courts. So actually just having an opportunity to be talked through what is likely to happen, what you can expect, where you will wait when you go in court, who might you see, all of those things. They're actually just an opportunity to talk through what that might look like and how that might feel would make a massive difference. Women talked about almost having an information pack with some visual things in that you could see, so that you could see the courtroom and all of that stuff, because all of that reduces some of the anxiety. And for some women, it is the first time, but for others, as Nikki said, actually they've been in courts in different settings, and all of those connotations about court and judgment will be things that people bring into the room. So I think there's lots of prep work that can be done before that just makes that step through the door a little bit easier.
Brilliant, thank you. And Grace and Nikki, obviously we were talking about kind of a trauma-informed approach, and this has become a little bit of a kind of catch-all term in a lot of circles. So I was wondering, kind of, what do you see as most often misunderstood or maybe oversimplified when professionals do use this term?
I would say on the oversimplified bit, often people do think trauma informed can just mean being informed of trauma. So knowing that someone has had a sort of general traumatic experience, but they're not doing anything with it, not adjusting the environment or your practices, or trying to change a parent's experience with that information. I think that's the first thing about it being oversimplified. On what is misunderstood, I think that I would say two things. The first is that I think people can often think it is a static thing. So, like I said, having a toolbox of specific things that you might get out to do your trauma informed bit that you're about to do, rather than just incorporating it in general into how you approach working with a particular person, parent, family. And so adjusting it also to the person that you're dealing with. What works for one person might not work for another. What works for one person at one time during proceedings might not work for them later, because a parent's life is still evolving. The relationship that they're in or leaving will be changing. Their relationship with, for example, recovery will be changing. With their housing will be changing. Their family dynamics will be changing during proceedings. So actually, the things that you're doing to try and have a trauma-informed approach might also need to adjust. So you're constantly having to know and work with a person to find out what works for them to get the best result for them at different points. That's going to be changing the whole time. And also, I think something that I hear a lot that is a misunderstanding is that it isn't for everyone. That a trauma-informed approach is only something that should be employed by a professional that has a more ostensible therapeutic role in the process, but actually it is for all professionals to be taking this on. Some professionals will have more face time with a parent than another, of course, but really it is for legal professionals, it's for judges, it's for all professionals that work in a court, whatever their role is. Anyone that a parent's going to be interacting with really should be infusing their practice with this trauma-informed thinking. Nikki, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No, it was quite well covered there, to be fair. But for me, I just think it is about the practice. It has become one of those buzzwords, hasn't it, that kind of gets pinged around. But I think it's very important to remember that actually it is a practice. It's not as difficult as it might seem. And actually it's about keeping, I don't want to use the word proceedings, because I think it's very important to kind of steer away from that sort of idea of it being a proceeding. It's about people focused, and it's people at the center. And I think if you can keep some of your practices person focused, you're halfway there. You don't need any training for that, just to flip your thinking from it being a case to it being a person and a family. I think it's really quite that simple, just at the very, very beginning. And I think anyone can do that. And I think everybody should be doing that.
Okay, thank you. I suppose a question kind of open to all three of you. One of the key themes through kind of what all of you have spoken through is that relationship building and getting to know someone properly and understanding them. The family justice system is obviously quite often very time pressured, can be very adversarial. So what does that relationship building look like when there is a kind of time pressure? Are there any practical things that people could do very quickly and easily?
Do you want me to answer that one quite quickly? Because I think it's about communication, keeping that communication up, open line of communication. And it's not inexistent in standard court proceedings or enough, but I think potentially it's some sort of a liaison for the families, a point of contact for the family. If you need to question the court about something, or have information go backwards and forwards from the court, it sometimes has to go through a solicitor or other party solicitors, and it can be weeks and weeks before you get a response, if you get a response at all, to have someone there that you've got a point of call that you can contact and have that kind of overseeing that conversation. And I definitely think, and I think this would help with what you said about entering the court for the first time, have an initial meeting with some of the parties outside of a court. Don't take it to court first time. Meet in an office. It doesn't have to be a park or a cinema, or you haven't got to take them out for dinner. Something very simple, outside of court, and have somebody potentially there to meet you when you go into the court. Those sort of things that show that I think the relationships are built on action They're built on showing that you're trustworthy, showing that you care, showing that you're invested, showing that you're going to put some extra effort in. I think that's how those relationships are built. You can't force a relationship, but they can be built in those ways.
Thank you. Grace, do you want to come in?
Yeah, because I was just really, I mean, I totally agree with everything Nikki said, as always. And I particularly noted the point you made about it being about showing yourself as trustworthy, because I think that a lot of this does come down to transparency, because a lot of the relationship building that you're doing with a parent is about earning a parent's trust. And so that means things like, if there are next steps, actually following up on them, telling a parent when you're going to do something and then doing it, communicating with parents in language that a lay person understands, because not everyone is a trained professional, making sure that you're taking into account any kind of communication or learning needs that a parent might have, so that they really understand what it is that you're saying and the process. And really it's just about, as I said, doing what you say you're going to do, not letting parents down, and not letting them feel like they're out of the loop. And once you really can develop that kind of trust, that's when you're going to be able to work with a parent to really get good results for them, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. And Grace and Nikki, I might be returning to you again, because in your presentation, you mentioned the kind of power that professionals do bring into the room. And obviously, kind of the position they have, they do bring a certain power into the room. What are some practical ways that practitioners can acknowledge that power and possibly use it sort of more beneficially rather than unintentionally causing harm?
Shall I again? Thank you. For me, as a parent, and I think for all parents that are in that heightened state of anxiety, that heightened state of mistrust, and very, very stressful. I think it's, for me, I grant it, the professionals have that degree of power. For me, I think it's about not bringing that into the room, because I think we absolutely know that you hold the future of our families and our lives in your hands. We are very, very aware of that. What we want to see is that you're teachable, that actually you're willing to learn from us as much as you're willing to tell me what I need to do. We want to see that you're open to maybe not having all the answers, maybe not knowing everything, maybe not knowing exactly how my life should be run, but actually being open to figuring it out with me, and supporting me and signposting me, and having that knowledge base of where do I go if I want some relationship work, where do I need to go for the mental health work that I clearly am going to need, because most of us, let's be honest, not everyone family, but most families, it's not just about addiction, mental health, domestic abuse. It's usually a package of all three, or in some degree or another. So where am I going for help for that? Because that's multiple agencies we're bringing in, and so using that power to transfer into knowledge that you're going to gain, that you want to learn, and that you're going to share with me. I think that's the key for it, really, and not reinforcing that you have the power over me and my situation, because that's going to shut me off immediately and make me go, yeah, I don't think so.
Brilliant, thank you. And Grace and Kate, please do jump in as well, if you have any answers to these.
I guess, can I just say, Ben, I think there's something that Nikki again said earlier, was something about not thinking about people as cases, but recognising that they're families. And actually, I think that, one of the things that women have told us is most powerful for them is that when people speak directly to them, and actually, it's not about not acknowledging the difficulties, it's not about changing the outcome, it's just about recognising them as individuals, and, doing that in a compassionate way won't necessarily change the outcome of the decision that's made about where the children or child will live, but it will have a massive impact on what people take out of court with them, and how they're able to recover, not just from what brought them into court, but also all of that experience while they're in court.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kate, if I can stay with you for a second, something that both yourself and Nikki mentioned about families kind of finding themselves back in court. I think one of the ways that this could possibly be avoided is a kind of better post-proceedings support. So what kind of practical post-proceedings support, that's a difficult thing to say fast, would families benefit from to kind of maybe mitigate them or avoid them returning to court?
I mean, I think as I just said a moment ago, I think that actually what happens after court is that, you know, families are left with all of those difficulties, multiple complex difficulties. Quite often women we've worked through care proceedings have received a diagnosis through an expert witness assessment or something, but actually they're left at the end of court completely traumatized with all of those difficulties and not knowing where to go. And I think it needs to be more than signposting, because I think it's really hard to read the signs when you're traumatized, when you are scared, when you're frightened, and when you're grieving if your children haven't come home to your care. So I think actually some support that provides parents with an opportunity to address the issues that brought them into court, because there is a strong chance that they may well return back to court, um, and also to recover from some of the experiences that they've had during court. And I guess even if children go home, one of the things that parents that we've supported have said that when they have got to a position and their children have returned to their care, actually just the process of going through court where actually you're not good enough, you're not enough, you're not safe. How do you support parents to trust their own judgment when they've been through that process? So actually, I think that support needs to be in place if children return or if children aren't returned.
Thank you. Nikki, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was thinking about this when you mentioned it before about kind of the whole sort of post, you know, and pre-proceedings. And often we, as parents, we've come from the pre-proceedings, which is quite traumatic and stressful in itself. That very, very anxious state where you know it's imminent, you know court proceedings are imminent, you know you've got to make changes to prevent that, but you don't know how to make them changes and you don't know what to do. So it's kind of it's like a car wreck happening in slow motion, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. And then you enter court proceedings, children have been removed from your care, you go into court proceedings, and you are literally left in a void because there's no communication. Nobody tells you what's going on. You've got no children to care for. You are literally just sat on your own thinking, how the hell did I get here? What went wrong? What happened? Nobody to answer those questions for you. Then you have the chaos of the last hearing, the final hearing, that all kind of at the very last minute. It feels to you at the very last minute, it's all happening, everything's going on, and you're in that, and then you're in a deeper void now because the children have been removed from your care. So now you're left in that void and there's literally no communication. There's no kind of aftercare in a standard court proceedings. And I think that's what needs to change, that, you know, we're often left very, very re-traumatized from our previous trauma, but also new traumas have now come in. That whole proceeding, that whole situation is a whole new massive trauma. And I know in FDAC court proceedings, what's done, even if your children aren't removed to your care, work is done going on about how you can maintain that relationship, how you can build that relationship, how you can still gain the skills to be a healthy, functioning parent. And that's what you need. For about 18 months, maybe even 2 years after my court proceedings with my boys, I went to a very, very, very dark place, and my work life became infinitely worse, and I became influenced. I'm actually very shocked I survived it. I'm going to be honest. I'm lucky I survived it. And that's not uncommon. That kind of, you know, there was nothing to buffer or to help me heal from that at all. It just got worse. And I was very fortunate that my mum was able to help pull me out of the darkness a little bit. But without having that, some people never come out of that darkness, you know, and that's avoidable. It's very avoidable.
I think that's a really kind of important message to possibly end on there, that it is really avoidable, and much more needs to be done to kind of help pull people out of that place. And apologies, the lights seem to have gone off in the office building that I'm in. I'm hopefully still here. You can all see me. So I think unless there are any kind of final thoughts or remarks from any of the panelists, that kind of brings a bit of an end to this. There is one final webinar in this series, which we're running tomorrow from 1 till 2. One of my colleagues will be joined by Lisa Harker, the director of the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory, to discuss the future of the family justice system. So please come along to that as well. I'm sure it'll be very interesting. All that remains is for me to say a massive thank you to all of the panelists for joining me today. I hope you all found it as interesting as I did. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.